All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. We are going to finish up
Learner.
themes today.
We deep dive learner.
Oh, we did. Okay. Hey, everybody. We're gonna finish up our theme list today, and we'll finish it hopefully the first half, and then the last 20 minutes or so. I really want to be able to focus in on being to kind of talk more. I'll do this week and then next week. If you guys want to keep going, we could do one more, but I want to really kind of give you some pieces of how things mix and how you do blending, because that's where this becomes a lot more valuable. And I like to talk about a lot about a compass, and that you take StrengthsFinder themes and make them more of a compass to navigate. Talk to you guys through that I've kind of been processing this week on this specifically. But let me share my scribbles. That's helpful for some people and not so much for others, but we'll try this. Let's see. Come on. System takes a minute to kick in here. So what we'll do is, let me move this over here. Sorry. I like to see your faces. So get all my windows moved around. Helps me know that you're out there. There you are, Brendan. So we'll start with adaptability this week. And again, I think please jump in or let me know if there's anything I'm forgetting here. Same process as before. I'm going to kind of hit the essence of it. What that means then for communication, meaning how we express as well as how we listen, and then decision making, how we prioritize our solutions, and then I'll hit the dark side. And so adaptability. Now, I think when I profiled adaptability before, adaptability ends up, I believe it's Katie's in the working themes in the 4 domains. Yeah, adaptability is interesting because there's definitely a people piece to it, but adaptability ends up in the executing themes. And so there's a lot of different ways. You can always tell how people feel about themes and how they describe them. And so when it comes to adaptability, some people describe adaptability as flaky, whatever. It's very adaptable and flexible. Here's what I like to say. The essence of adaptability is responsiveness. They're very responsive. Huh?
It's relationship building.
Relationship
building. It is. Okay. I was gonna say, because I was like, originally in the very first draft, connectedness was in thinking, adaptability was actually in working. But adaptability has a relational element. So as the time goes by, it's kind of skewing more towards relationship, it sounds like. Responsiveness means people with adaptability are very responsive to the outside world. So I had someone say one time, you're in your house. Imagine you have a house in the suburbs somewhere out in the country, and one morning you wake up and you decide you need to mow your lawn or work in your garden. And on your way to where you keep your tools, you realize that the screen door of your house is squeaking. So you need to go stop and fix the screen door. But on the way to the screen door to be fixed, you realize the mailman has come and delivered the mail. And so you stop and go do the mail. Adaptability has now got tools, a half-done screen door, and because as they're going about their life, they're discovering new things. And so they're very responsive to the world around them. And so adaptability doesn't simply want variety, they need variety. And so in fact, for people with adaptability, normal school settings, if your school is set up, not in the Montessori version, but the traditional version, school can be challenged because teachers will say things like, you have to finish this one thing before you can do anything. Adaptability likes the variety. And so they're very responsive, and so they expect and need variety. Now, here's what's interesting. You've heard me say this with other themes. Adaptability, again, I'm describing these one by one, is really impacted by other themes. So if my brain is one of, I'm naturally responsive to the world, I'm around ready for anything, if I mix this with any other theme, it simply means that whatever my other theme is doing has to be as responsive as possible. So if I'm deliberative and adaptability, remember deliberative, I'll just do deliberative, which is all about caution. And so I'm naturally hunting for the landmines. I'm naturally hunting for the risks. Adaptability, that, because not only am I normally, I'm looking even more, what is going to be happening? Who else has needs? I am naturally responsible. So I have responsibility. Remember, responsibility is psychological ownership. So it's I own whatever it is I've tied this to. Well, whatever my plan is of ownership is multiplied by being more responsive. That's when it's anchored by a really clear X theme. But adaptability, when paired up with something like ideation, it's ideation by its very nature, I would say, is intellectual adaptability. Idea is very creative in their thinking. One idea leads to another. This together is like gasoline on a fire. It's even a hyper creative. It's hyper receptive because one is intellectual, one is more relational. And so when it comes to adaptability, it's a natural responsiveness. When it can be, some people will say, oh, it's flaky. Why? Because adaptability often without an executing theme attached to it. Adaptability has a flexible relationship with time. So what happens is they, I ask, Brendan, let's imagine he has adaptability. I asked him to come hang out with me. And he says, you know what, Mike, what's the worst that, he's like, I'm going to meet Mike at 2. Well, what's the worst that can happen? And so between him getting to me, 5 other people talking, he's like, Mike will be okay. I'm not that important. Mike will start the meeting without me. Because adaptability says, I can just flex. I can be adaptable. It's not that big of a deal. And so he flexes. And so because he's adaptable to the people he meets between his office and my office. And so people go, oh, it's flaky, it's flexible, it's not rigid. It's not. They're responsive. So adaptability can meet people, accept them where they are. They can almost anywhere. They're very responsive to the world they're in. The power of it is like water. Water takes on whatever form it's in. So here's the deal. Think of it this way. Water has its greatest power in a hose. It is constrained and pointed. Think of it. The constraint with the right angle gives water great power. So adaptability needs a form. Adaptability, you may not like, unless you have executing or thinking themes, you may not want to create that form. So you do well when there's a clear form, like a sandbox. You can be as creative as you want in sandbox as long as there's good boundaries. Responsiveness, communication, they're listening for options or choice. When I say, do it my way, this is what I want, the filter on adaptability's head is like, what? Like, you're telling me there's only one way? And they're resistant to it. They don't hear it. You may avoid people who overly speak declaratively and directionally. And so when you speak, so that's when you're listening. When you speak, you'll get options. Like, what's the options? Adaptability is really high in students under the age of 22. Gallup has found a higher propensity of adaptability in teenagers. Again, has to do with the prefrontal cortex development and what creates logic in our brains. But in the early days, you might ask a person with adaptability, this is the one that parents are asking me to talk to their kids about all the time. Because why? If you have adaptability, people will say, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do with your life? And adaptability is having a job, like living in the house, maybe a dog or a kid. Like, but here's the thing. People will then say, oh, my child is directionless. They just don't know what to do. Reality is not the case. Actually, adaptability is saying, if I say yes to this one thing, I'll have to say no to 1,000 others. And so they go, well, I don't want to just pick. I need to be open. And so they may want to be a doctor, but why say I'm going to be a doctor when I might end up being a physical therapist? It's in the same field. So here's the other thing. When it comes to decision making, and again, I think I've talked about this, decision making, Don't ask yourself, what do I want? Ask, what do I not want? What do I not want? This is the key factor for adaptability, because adaptability will struggle with knowing what they're going to have for dinner, what they, people say, what do you want for dinner? And then they'll say, I don't care, whatever you want. And then you say, let's go for Italian food. And they'll say, well, I don't want Italian. Well, let's go, what you just said you didn't care. Here's the thing, because adaptability, your brain doesn't just pick. So the better way to make decisions, adaptability, is, well, I don't want this, and I don't want this. And then keep doing the I don'ts to narrow down the field, and then just pick something out of the middle. Start with that kind of a focus. And so when that happens, you want to basically kind of really drive that in there. Is that this idea of what do I not want is then reversed. And so even today, I did my weekly email that I send out every week. And what ends up coming out is people talk about, I don't have a vision. I'm not very good at vision, and I need a vision to direct your life. Yes, you need a vision to navigate your life. But for adaptability and for a lot of other people, reverse engineer your complaints. What do you don't have said about your life when you're 50, when you're 80? What is it you don't want? Let your five complaints, your 5 greatest complaints are the seed of a great vision. Maybe you don't have a vision of what you really want. I want to be this great, but you do have a vision of, you know what? I don't want this. I don't want this regret. I don't want that regret. And you kind of go from there. So communications and responsiveness is the essence. Communication, you're listening for options and choice. When it comes to decision-making, ask yourself what you don't want. When it comes to the dark side, is that you can just be too reactive. It's the, what's the worst that can happen? So it's reactive. Where you are not driving your own life, you're not actually even in control of your own life. And so it doesn't, and here's the thing, you don't have to be driving, but you have to be cautious about the gravity. So some people are driven, some people are led. Adaptability, if this is dominant for you without an executing theme, you're gonna find that gravity, kind of like the moon, everybody knows about how they got to outer space, right? They slingshot around the moon to go further. That's how satellites pick up speed. You pick towards a big piece of gravity, you let the gravity pull you, and then use that momentum. Adaptability is the same thing. Things that have the greatest gravity, pull them. Choose the gravity in your life. Because if you're not gonna be if you're not direct and be really pushing yourself, what is it you're allowing to pull you? That's gonna be a key piece. What is pulling you along? So pick that. Otherwise, you'll just be reactive. Also, don't get distracted. Limit your exposure to things. The trick is, if you're gonna be you, you have to put blinders on. Don't read too much, don't look at too much, don't engage too much, because to engage is to be hooked. So take away that first step. You wanna not eat ice cream at night? Don't buy ice cream in the store. It's kind of that whole limitation, limit yourself kind of a thing. It's like, it's the moment before the moment that's gonna be important. All right, that's gonna be adaptability. And I'm gonna kind of contrast this with the opposite theme, which is consistency. Because we haven't done that one yet, right? The essence of consistency is, consistency originally was called fairness, but it could also be called justice. Justice. Never play board games with these people. Have you ever played a board game with somebody and you don't really know the rules, and so a third of the way through the game, you're like, okay, well, starting now, the rules will be. People with consistency are like, no. Consistency says we are starting again. They hate inconsistency. The system to work well. They like the system to, the system has to work out. And so it's about fairness. And so when it comes to being consistent, are you creating, it's like levels of service. They hate exceptions. And so when you come to someone and say, let's imagine boss has consistency, and you're like, hey, Greg, just this time, could I maybe leave at 4 o'clock on, or 3 o'clock on Friday, back in the days when we all went to offices? And Greg says to himself, he knows, yeah, there's no problem doing that. And here it is. But here's the thing for consistency. They say in their heads, if I say yes right now, I lose the right to ever say no again. Because once I've set that bar. So consistency is like, what expectation am I set right now? What exactly is it that's being set? What exactly am I trying to say? And so they think about that. Could I be consistent? They hate, now it's not what you know, but who you know. That's crazy. No. There are exceptions to the rule, or you change the rule. And so this is where you see the justice component come in. This component of justice is that it needs to work for them. And so they're constantly aware of who's being fair and who's not. Working with a Lake Washington School District in Redmond, Washington, probably a decade ago now, a principal left one of their junior highs or middle schools, and the assistant principal had been there for a long time. And the new principal came in, and it was great, and they loved working together until, this is the most bizarre story, until one day he started getting really annoyed. And in the end, here's what it was. The principal changed the fruit being offered in the cafeteria. They had only ever had apples and bananas. And he said, well, I want oranges too. The assistant principal said, it's not fair. We've never offered oranges before. And they're like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, it's not fair. I'm like, to who? I mean, and he was talking as if other generations are gonna come back and say, I want my orange. How come I didn't have an orange when I was in middle school? But for him to suddenly change the fruit, well, it's been good enough before. Why is it not good enough today? And so what ends up happening is, I said, listen, here's the deal. This is kind of a bit of the dark side. Consistency can get overly focused on being consistent on things that don't matter. What if you were consistent about the fruit, and in the event he swaps out the fruit for Snickers bars, you can call it the inconsistency. Be consistent about, are we producing the final result consistently? Not is the tactic the same. Does that make sense? It's a different approach. And so keep your consistency when it comes to communication. Again, you're listening for inconsistency. So it being inconsistent, which it's kind of self-explaining there. But you're also going to be seen for who's being injured by decisions. This is, this is the justice part. And so you're listening for, okay, wait a minute. Is Mike being inconsistent? Is he kind of all over the place? Does he favor some over others? And so consistency matters. The good news is consistency, when they communicate, they can talk to a person who doesn't have a home, or the president of the United States, or the UN, or at the highest level of their company without any issue. It does not matter who they are. Everyone is equal. Everyone matters. So decision-making, it's going to be a priority on justice, on reproducibility. And so you may find that people will say, well, yes, we can this one time do this. But you're like, can I do that over and over and over again? And so even right now, as people are trying to figure out the new reality of, if you're like me and a consultant and a coach, it's like, okay, Mike, you can do video courses and things like that, but is it consistent? Can you do this for the next 18 months if people aren't doing group settings? Like, how do you do that? And so consistency will go, yeah, they're resistant of anything they haven't yet experienced, and they're afraid that they can't actually be consistent in. And so then the dark side ends up being more about is that there are times to make an exception. And so they can get focused on the wrong level of consistency. And so anything level of detail, yeah, there we go. Is it anything that ends up being too narrow? Go for the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. Deliver, and you know that phrase, the spirit of the law, meaning what's the intent? The system should have the same result for people, and the system may have to be different because of that. This is the difference between equity and equality. If you understand this idea, right? Is that what the dark side of consistency is when it gets to equality. The system has to be the same for everybody. Well, guess what? Have you guys seen the Apple box example? The three little kids trying to see over the baseball fence. There's 3 little kids. They're trying to see over a baseball fence. And so they're like, well, we've got 3 boxes. We got 6, we've got 6 boxes total that the kids can stand on. Well, then 3 kids, every kid gets 2 boxes. Well, then that's great. But the tallest kid is now super tall. The middle kid's only part way. And the little girl still can't see because she needed 3 boxes. Well, the goal is they should all be able to see over the fence. So 3 boxes to the baby, 2 boxes to the middle, 1 box to the oldest, because at the end, they can all see over the fence. And so this ends up being the question. Now, politics and all the other stuff aside, it's the difference between equality and equity. These are different. The system should produce the same result. That doesn't mean the system is always the same. Consistency is constantly battling this. This is what they're thinking about, okay? All right, what's my next one here? We did deliberative, we've done discipline, we did focus. So individualization and learner, Katie, is that lit?
And futuristic.
Oh, futuristic, let's do futuristic. Futuristic, I mentioned this before, the essence of futuristic, my scribbles today, who cares? Potential. Now, this is different than what Gallup will say, right? You'll read Gallup and he'll say vision, vision, vision. Yes, that's true, but vision for what? And I use the word potential because it's vision for what could be. This is in everything. You see what your life could be. You meet someone and think of what they could do with their life. You go to a restaurant, eat a sandwich, and think if they would just add pickles to the sandwich, it would taste amazing. And so I always can say, like, futuristic is you have an eye for the upgrade. Like, you always see how it could be upgraded. How could it be a little bit better on some level? You also, however, do see the future. It is also about vision. Is that ultimately what ends up happening is it's about long term, like 20 years. It's not even short term. We're talking like way out there. So if you have futuristic in your top 5 and it's dominant for you, you're thinking about where you want to be 20 years from now. And so today is a very different approach. Like, how does today connect to tomorrow? That's a totally different conversation. And so what can happen is I can go, oh, stop being so futuristic. Stop thinking so far out. What you really need to do is focus on today and the choices you're making now. And you're like, if today doesn't connect to tomorrow, it's useless. They've got to connect together. And so futuristic, you may find great energy in doing things right now. You may be, wow, I'm so focused on today. That's because something has connected to where you want to be. So constantly do that work of connecting those 2 things. Futuristic, the moment you realize a job you have does not connect to the 20-year vision, you're out. You're going to find that you're going to be like, yeah, I'm over it. Suddenly the job is a drudge. It's just exhausting and you don't know how. That's because it doesn't necessarily serve the long-term vision, and serving vision is really important. So when it comes to communication, again, we're talking about potential. There's almost a critique because you're going, what could be? You're talking about what you see. And here's the other thing. You're listening for things that have potential. So when I'm talking about maintenance, when I'm talking about just maintaining things that already exist, when I'm talking about things that are just kind of going along that don't necessarily talk about tomorrow, you may find that it's harder for you to hear. That ultimately you're listening for what's down the road. You're listening for the long term, okay? So decision-making then is the same. It's about what has the greatest long-term value. You're going to prioritize the solution that's going to have the greatest impact long-term. But here's the deal. Just so you know, you're going to be very compelling to other people. Because when you talk, you don't just see the future, you see it in so much detail that we're like, oh my goodness, Jenny has been to the future and come back to tell me about it. Why? Because she can describe it like this and this and this. And so what we'll do is we'll get totally excited about a futuristic. Wow, it's really clear. I mean, how Katie's describing this is awesome. Ignoring the fact that having a vision is completely different than knowing how to get to the vision. And so we'll go, oh, well, you know, Sean said I could do this and this and this, but Sean also said I had to go talk to somebody else to figure out how to do that. He was just saying I could. He was just saying he saw me. And so seeing the future is completely different from knowing how to get there. This is why we need each other, because we need achiever, activator, responsibility. We need those themes to kind of work into that. And futuristic ends up being a theme of potential, but it needs to be partnered with execution and planning and like the strategic thinking themes. And so the dark side is, so the dark side ends up being a challenge of being present is hard for futuristics. I always say futuristic shows up in the, so being present is a challenge. The dark side is that we at times, it can be, I have futuristics who say, I show up in meetings before they start and I leave before they finish. So I'm always really, really good with futuristics until about halfway through a meeting, because then they're mentally around to the next meeting, the next thing. And so that hard part is that tension of being drawn by tomorrow, and you can sacrifice today, especially if today has pain, especially if today has challenge. If today is not crazy cool, and you're like, you can mentally be gone tomorrow. And so a team you're leading is like, why aren't they satisfied? The people around you are like, why did they check out? Because you're excited about our meeting and our time together before the class. And then once the class starts, it starts to drain as we get, like, this is the moment exactly in a class where at 10:30 on a, Central Time, you're like, yeah, I'm on to the next thing. Come on, Mike, wrap it up. Where are you? Like, mentally you move past. And so that's futuristic. And so potential is the key. You see the upgrade of vision, communication, what is going to last a long time, decision-making, what will have the greatest future value, also with a little bit of eye on influencing. The dark side is you'll sacrifice now for tomorrow. And you also get impatient. It's a little bit like learner in that way. Okay, that's futuristic. Individualization, is that right? Individualization. All right, this, individualization. Okay, made up word. The essence of individualization is a thing that is unique. Now, Gallup skews this one extremely relational. When I talk about StrengthsFinder themes, I often say there's 3 major relational themes: woo, relator, individualization. Okay, if woo goes to a party, it might talk to 100, relator might talk to 5, individualization might talk to 1. And if you have woo and those other themes, you work the 100 to find the 1. Okay. And so individualization ends up being purely focused in as unique, as individual, because they're one-on-one attention. They see how people are uniquely put together. And so when it comes to individualization, they naturally kind of focus in and say, what's the unique piece? What's the smallest form? How does this work? But unique is about anything. You may find that you find how to use resources uniquely. You can repurpose things into, there's that old test, right? Where it's a box of candles and a tack and a box. There's an actual game. They're like, okay, here, use this and create a candle stand. And you try to figure out how to do that or whatever. And suddenly somebody uses the tacks, they stick it in the wall, in the side of the box, and it holds the candles up. Like, they repurpose the box into the candle stand. Individualization has the ability to see, and this is a phrase, beyond the curse of knowledge. Beyond the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is a term that's used that once you learn something, it's impossible to go back to not knowing how to do it. You can't teach yourself how to unknow something. So the curse of knowledge is a real thing where we start to go, think of it. If I had told you 6 months ago that Ralph Lauren was making medical masks that you could wear in the mall, you'd think I was crazy. Why on earth would Ralph Lauren be making face masks or PPP for the hospital? But there's a whole news thing on how he's making PPP. No. Why? Because the curse of knowledge. Ralph Lauren doesn't make personal protective equipment. Ralph Lauren makes clothing and stuff. Well, because of suddenly a catastrophe, our curse of knowledge is a little broken by the situation, and we can see it. Individualization sees this all the time. They see people uniquely. They don't just stick them in boxes. They're like, oh, you're different, you're different. And so when they focus on us, it's genius because it's brilliant. They see things that we would never see. I always say, like, individualization looks at you and they would never look over their head and over your head and wave at someone else. They shut out the noise and they just stare at you and you're like, can you see my soul? Like, it's so deep. They're just so inside. You're like, if you don't have an individualization person in your life, you need them because they're like, they just focus in. And so when they communicate focused in on you or what makes something stand out. They're listening against, or they don't listen as well, or resistant to things that are stereotypes. No, not all children are like this. No, not all immigrants are like this. No, like, they don't like generalizations. So when they communicate, they don't communicate in generalizations. When it comes to StrengthsFinder, some individualization loves StrengthsFinder because it gives them vocabulary to describe how everyone is unique. Others who've had bad experience with tools hate it because they're like, oh, don't put a box in me. You want me to take this test so you can label me. Don't label me. And they feel that pain. And so what's interesting is it's people with individualization, they do seem to do it really well. On some, they do get StrengthsFinder really clearly. Others are completely resistant to it. Phil Jackson, some of you maybe heard me say this. Phil Jackson, by the way, making a lot in The Last Dance these days. We're getting to see him again. Phil Jackson, considered one of the greatest basketball coaches of all time. Phil identifies individualization as one of his dominant StrengthsFinder themes. During a project with the NBA years ago when Phil was in LA, how do you know? Like, what do you mean? He says, in all of his years, I don't know if it was like within the Bulls LA, Phil was very much into Zen, New Age meditation, personal development. But Phil said every coach, every year, he bought every player on his teams a personal development book. All the years of buying books for players, he has never bought the same book twice. He customises every book for each player. That's individualization. Why? Because he knows that the needs of Jessica are different than the needs of Marsha, really different than the needs of Christina or Grace. And so here's the phrase: everyone should be equally, but no one should be treated the same. Everyone should be valued equally, but no one should be treated the same. It kind of turns the golden rule on its head a little bit. My grandmother always used to talk about, well, follow the golden rule. Well, that was based on an old verse out of the Bible. If you grew up reading the Bible, basically treat others the way you want to be treated. See, that assumes that what I want is what Katie wants. Instead, I should value Katie as much as me and her needs as much as me, realize that she needs something different than I need. Everyone should be valued equally, but no one should be treated the same. So when it comes to decisioning, they prioritize, again, uniqueness. They prioritize variety. They prioritize scale for diversity. Because that's going to be it has multiple options. One size fits all is not a solution. So they'll prioritize uniqueness, variety, and scale for diversity. The dark side is that personally, individualization wants to be known, and so they resist. But here's the thing. They want to be known, but they don't want to be boxed in. So they resist being known. And so you look with individualization, and you'll say something. Okay, well, here's what I hear you saying. I'll pretend it's Brendan. Okay, Brendan, here's what I hear you saying. Da-da-da-da-da. And then individualization at their darkest goes, well, it's kind of like, not quite. And no matter what you say to them, they're like, not quite, not quite. It's interesting. They keep communicating with you because they want to be known, but they're also scared of being too known. And so you have this push-pull where they don't let people in. One time with a group, I was like, okay, guys, when Marcus comes back in, I want you to say to Marcus these words. Marcus, here's what I hear you saying. And he would say it, and no matter, we got 6 times, and finally we all just started laughing because we were basically trying to mess with him to try to get him to say, would he ever say, yes, that's what I'm saying. He couldn't bring himself to admit that somebody had got him, had understood him, because he had felt that tension between being understood, but also being seen as unique. And so individualization, uniqueness, they're focused in on, kind of being creative in people, seeing situations uniquely. They want to focus in on you. They resist stereotypes. They like things that scale for diversity. Dark, they resist being known as deeply as they want to be known. Any questions about individualization? Any questions about any learner, individuals? I think we're all, is that all of them, Katie? Have I hit all of them here?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you have.
You guys want to kind of give me some stuff, like talk to me about what are things, as we covered all 34, what are some things in your head that you're like, I'm still wondering about this though, Mike? How about when this works with that? Or, like what is the thing what are some things that are kind of sticking up in your head?
I would say, what about talking a little theme contrast? Because that's always an interesting dynamic when that happens.
Sure. And so you can have, here's the thing, you can have themes that will ultimately compete with each other. So sometimes they're in your own head. Sometimes they are on, it's more of our perception about them. For example, you've got ability and consistency. So if you've got adaptability and consistency, I want the system to create the same result, saying I'm going to be flexible. One of the challenges then, how does that work? I have unstable internet, it says. Apologize. Forgive me. Can you guys hear me? Okay. All right. My network, I get these warnings that the network's going unstable. The trick what will be, Marcia, is that when you have themes that are conflicting, like you have harmony and command, or activator and command, or you've got consistency and adaptability, the trick is which scenario calls out for which theme. So there are certain, in fact, for example, with strategic and belief as in a profile, when it comes to decision-making, strategic is making decisions about removing roadblocks. But belief is also really concerned with not being a part of things that counteract its values. So what it does, so it can be very, very slow at times. Well, there's times when there's a lot of pulling triggers and moving. You have to decide why am I slow sometimes, why others? And so it's, when I say within your 5 themes, there are 3 that are dominant. It's not like the rest. What you'll find is that certain themes grab hold at certain times. And so like for strategic prioritizes whatever's closest. And so it's like, man, this is an issue right here in front of me and it's holding me back. I'm gonna make a decision on that quickly. But when it comes to, do I even get on the road? They ask much bigger questions. Do I want to go? Well, let's say I'm getting on the road. What are my values look like? And so those are some things that are contrasting. And so are there any other themes in particular that anybody was thinking about? They want to know the difference between them?
Well, while we're on strategic, I've been interested to hear strategic with connectedness for kind of what you were saying.
Right. So strategic, so connectedness is connecting to all the different pieces and parts, right? So it's everything. It's the world, it's in general. Connectedness sees the world like a spider diagram, right? There's the moment, there's the person, and then what's connected in circles. Strategic then says, okay, now that I see everything, which one is the greatest roadblock and how do I grab hold of it? So one is kind of mapping the world. Strategic is then deciding which way to get through that world. And so you're gonna have more to navigate. What can happen though is if you have those two and you're feeling the pressure to navigate, what decision do I make? But you're not having actual ability to the world, that's when it feels disconnecting. Because you're going, I have to make decisions, but I'm stuck in my house. Like for connectedness, seeing it, experiencing it. And so if you're feeling, man, I'm exhausted, the trick is don't pull the trigger until you get to map the world. Because you're like, well, I should be able to make this decision quick. That's strategic. No, your connectedness is saying, wait a minute, which comes in, which leads me to this point. Your themes never work alone. They always pair, always in some form. So even as I'm describing these one by one, your mix makes you unique because those themes have a chemical reaction that twists them into something a little different. So Emily, if you're like, yeah, usually I can just navigate. I feel it, I decide. And right now you're like, I gotta make decisions about like the summer and the fall and everything. And like, but what? It's because right now, it's not properly clear. You can't map it, you can't see it, you can't talk to people, can't get out of your house. And so it feels really different. Does that make sense? Anybody else? Actually,
Yeah, I have a question.
Nothing. Yeah, please.
So I'm sure that just because you don't have any execution themes in your top 10 doesn't mean you can't execute, but what do you do to help people strategize if they're heavier with thinking and feeling themes?
Exactly. People will make this mistake. Oh, I don't have any thinking themes, therefore I don't think. Actually, no, it's the complete opposite. You do all the categories of thinking is more label to help people have another way of understanding them. So like for me, I have no executing themes, but I know that I work hard. But here's the thing, I'm aware of my bias. My bias is only to work on things because I'm all influencing except for positivity. So my bias is to discard work that it seems boring, maintenance, or doesn't seem to have momentum. And so I default into it. So when it comes to work that is maintenance, that is boring work, that is executing, I have to give it a future, I have to reframe it in a future orientation. Okay, Mike, what does being consistent about sending out my weekly emails do for my future? That makes sense? I used to have an assistant who was all relating themes and none of working, but we used to have to do all these packets where we'd have to print and staple and follow up. And she would always put it off to the last minute. And I was like, I got an idea. I want you at, when should you really start the work? And she was like 6 weeks out. And I said, at week 6, I want you to call the site leader and get all the names and spend an hour on the phone just talking to them about people. Because I had to humanize the work. And so what I did was I attached all the people. I have her attach the work to people to help, can you use her relational themes to get things done? Strategically, when it came to like connectedness, strategic, I was talking to a planner who opened hospitals in Massachusetts. And she's like, I kind of get lost in the details. I'm more relational. And I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to map out all the deadlines and I want like a connectedness chart and tell me everyone who will feel pain if you miss a deadline. And so what you do is you figure out how to use the themes that are dominant for you to do the other thing. Same thing. I do best thinking when I'm writing and I'm talking to other people and getting feedback on it. When it comes to executing, just so you know, executing, you'll make your best relationships on people that you're working or volunteering with. Like it'll be a connection almost always based on work. Influencing, you'll make a connection. You'll be the most hardworking on things with momentum. You're gonna be most relating on with people that are also dreaming. You'll do well with people that are thinking if you can understand what their vision is. Mm-hmm. So you basically take what you do well and then manipulate it. So for me, my tricks are with influencing. 1, I have to pitch it in my future. 2, and this is a nightmare for me right now in shutdown. I surround myself with people publicly to do work that doesn't involve people. I'll go sit in coffee shops with headsets on because the motion of the people around me is energizing. But if I don't have my headset on, I'll talk to them. So I manipulate my brain into getting one without the other.
Does anything come to mind for collection and individualization? Those are probably my 2 dominant.
Give me the first one.
Intellection and individualization.
Yeah. And so the 2 pieces are, so when it comes, you have to plan to do the work. Like tell yourself when you're gonna, because intellection will start to think. Give yourself the deadline of, I will think until this. So and then say, and what's the one thing I can find that no one else has found? Because that's the other idea. And so when it comes for you and people, I'm going to want you to go, I'm intentional, because intellection is a lot about intentionality. How do I intentionally step into something? Individualization is, and also it's enough that it's unique to you. Don't feel the need to convince others of the uniqueness of it. This is where the dark side kicks in, is if you see something unique and I don't see it, you can start to worry, is my site really good? If Mike doesn't see it, how do I know it's true? And then you stop embracing, look, I saw something and it's unique, and going, I gotta convince the world it's unique. No, screw that. What you need to do instead is go, this is what I see, I've expressed the uniqueness of it, and then move on. You seeing it is enough. Mm-hmm. If you get focused in on me going, well, what if he doesn't get it? Who cares? Mm-hmm. The fact that you see it's enough. That make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, Mike, what about how about a little bit of extra detail on positivity and empathy? Because I
Totally.
find personally some conflict in that, and so go for it.
Positive. And so empathy, here's the thing, empathy is like adaptability, but it's emotional adaptability. So meaning you're very responsive and aware. But here's the thing, not only are you aware, it produces the same things inside of you. And so what can happen is that you feel all the feelings, but then your brain is super tuned to who's having negative feelings as an aversion, or you're drawn to people who are positive. If you flip it into, man, I have to be aware of their feelings and make it positive, that's a lot more like includer. Like includer and empathy, remember I talked about those two. Empathy is a thermometer. It feels feelings, that's it. Includer then says, I feel feelings and I have to take action where I draw people in so they feel included and they emotionally feel better. Empathy positivity is, I feel feelings. I now feel the need to help people feel positive. Well, the good news is you can do that naturally as long as you boundary it. Because here's the challenge. When you take ownership of someone else feeling a certain way, it's the challenge. Much like what I said with Kate, where individualization, when they shift from I see something unique to having to convince me of the uniqueness, that's different than you going, hey, I feel your feelings. I want to give you hope, versus I'm now responsible for convincing you that you have hope. Because that's a step too far. You can't do that for them. So put out the positivity because you choose to, and your positivity is not diminished because they may not be positive. It's being able to go, I feel feelings. So your natural tendency, so Brendan, knowing for yourself, I'm going to naturally feel everything and I'm going to want to be positive. That means then the best boundary is, how do I limit the time with people who are going to be draining, and how far am I willing to go to not sacrifice myself to put out my positivity? If you set, because here's the deal, by the way, for empathy, includer, individualization, actually, this is a key thing. I can't believe I didn't talk about this. You know who the emotion suckers are. You know who's going to suck you dry. Before, I used to say, you're in the lobby of a church or a building or something, and you can see me coming across the lobby. If you have high emotional themes, oh gosh, here comes Mike, it's bad. So here's the deal. Empathy in a moment, or relational, they want to be present. And so they're like, I'll be present, get away. But then the moment comes and we're like a vacuum cleaner, sucking the soul out of you like a Dementor or something from Harry Potter. Okay, we're just here sucking the life out of your soul. You can't get away. Here's a trick, language. Brendan, next time you see me coming, you say this, like, and here's the next phrase. I only have 2 minutes. How are you? If you have relational themes, never say, how are you, without a time limit. Because what ends up happening is it gives you the excuse and sets the ground rules from the beginning. You can get out. It's going to go more than 2 minutes. But if you don't do that, we will drain you dry. So relational themes, to prevent and protect yourself, I've only got 5 minutes, but how are you? So then when it comes to 5 minutes, you can go, listen, like I mentioned, it's good to see you, but I really do have to go. To make it an excuse in the moment, when you're now being overwhelmed by my feelings because you didn't set the boundary, too hard to get out of. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
Somebody else.
Mike, I know you mentioned the woo and relator. I feel like you've spun it in the positive light of 100 people and then go on the 5, but could you speak a little bit more detail on that? I feel like for me, having those two, there's always never being socially satisfied of sorts, but.
Yeah, the dark side of that will be that you'll double and triple book yourself. On some levels, you'll go, I won't commit to one thing because I'm worried about missing out another bigger party opportunity. And so you can feel the pressure and the burden of that, where you're like, it's weird. You want to be a part, but you'll also keep your options open all the time, kind of waiting. Knowing the pieces ultimately is going, if you're feeling that absolute hunger that's kind of overwhelming, the social's never satisfied, it's likely a sign that the deeper also isn't being satisfied, because it's a balance. Is it trying to figure out how am I getting core relationships? How am I getting my core time? And that may be just again, relators, you need time with people you don't need to explain yourself to. And so that's part of that challenge, is that going, can being in a public space, even again, as safe as possible, whatever, be satisfying if you actually have enough time with people that you love and care about deeply, people that you're like, they get me, they understand me. And so you may find too, Matt, even as you get older, that woo decreases. Over time, woo becomes less of a driver, but the priority really does become on, do I have my 6 people? Do I have my ride or die, as they say? Do I have my core? Because that's where the energy should be. Because the woo part is almost satisfying out. The relator part has got to be on the inside. It's got to be about you. I'm in a world that knows me. That's a big priority, and that'll anchor the rest. Does that make sense? Somebody else.
A question on what you just said.
Yeah.
Is it possible through time, maturity, age, that some themes start to change?
Yeah, what you're going to find ultimately is that, so Gallup is now finally doing long-term studies. Strengths Finder is about 20, 21 years old. And so they're finding that results are stable. What is very true though, is that how you use the themes will shift. Like what it ends up like. And so for me, I was way dominant woo positivity, really until about 30. Then I really started traveling and doing what I do for a living, which meant I had to be able to turn things on. So people always say, Mike, you're so extroverted. I bet you meet people on airplanes all the time. I'm the guy who does not, I can't tell you the last time I spoke to a person on an airplane in the last 3 years. When I leave a site, I'm that idiot who's wearing sunglasses inside, a baseball cap, sunglasses, and headphones. And I get on the plane and I don't speak to maybe the flight attendant because I have to turn it off. What you find is that you get better. Either you get more aware of using all your themes, or you default more into your themes. Think of it, as you age, you don't suddenly look totally different. You look more and more like yourself, and so you narrow. I used to like to say that my grandmother, but when she was young, she'd have all these themes. But by the time Nancy died, her only 2 themes left were like poke and nag. That's all she'd use. Because that's all she'd used after 80 years. That's where she got to. The next ones. The more you use your themes, the more they become embedded in focus. And so over time, yeah, it is complete. You can learn to use your themes different. You can learn to use more than your list. What is not typical is I'm going to go from deliberative. I have deliberative at 34 to 10. Yeah, not so much. But I rely on my harmony, which is like number 7 for me. I rely way, way, way more. And so ultimately, I think just kind of segue off of what Greg's saying to wrap this up, is that I'm right now trying to reinvent my world. Like the way I've done business has gone away because I can't do grip and grin in the cities I'm in. Group workshops are dead for probably 18 months. And be able to do this, imagine doing 6 hours of this online. No company in the world is going to do that. So I'm having to reframe literally from scratch everything. And today's the first day I'm not miserable about that. But my buddy's always saying to me, Mike, you're always saying, hey, on your strengths. And like he's my oldest client. We're talking today. He's older than me. I was like, you know what? My dominant themes for me are communication and positivity with some activator chucked in. So if I may translate that back, I'm like, I'm at my best when I'm operating in a world of understanding/clarity, when I help people believe in courage and taking a risk, and I demand that there's hope. Like I'm at the best. And I'm like, I can lose track of that. I can get all tied up in Strengths Finder and when these works, but we'll say, well, focus on your strengths. Like, what does that mean? It's the conversation. Because if you guys are cool with it, I would like to do this again next week, but just this, where we just talk through all your questions. We just unpack stuff. Like you leaving with like, what exactly are my dominant 3? Like, what does this look like? Because I realized that ultimately as I'm reframing my life, I'm going, you know what? The best version of me for the next 45 years, I'm 45, I'm gonna live to be 90, is gonna be one where I get to experience creating understanding, where I help people believe that they can take risks and there is hope. Like that brings out the best in me. And I think it has the greatest impact. And that will be a good use of my life. And that is based on communication, command, and positivity. When you look at your 5, what are the 3 that you're like, no matter what my job is, no matter what it's going to be, the job I want to have, the company I want to start, the family I want to have, whatever it is, what are the words and the bigger description that you would have around, you know what, this is the values of my future life. These are the things that have to be known. These are the takeaways that have to come out of my future life. Your Strengths Finder themes are a good place to start with that. And so if you guys are cool, we'll do this again next week. And we'll just do that kind of talk. Going, let's take your themes Let's make it human and actually operationalize it beyond just chatting about it. Sound good? It's 11 o'clock my time. You guys have a great day. Thanks so much for being here, you guys. That means a lot to me.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Katie. Appreciate your help.
Always. Appreciate you.
Thanks,
Bye,
Mike.
Thanks.
Gracias, Miguel.
See you later.
Hey, Mike, do you guys wearing masks in Minnesota?
We are in some places. Like I wear masks.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. 1 second.
Oh, you're good. If you gotta.
Hold on. No, I want to stop.